I am Aviva Sapers, CEO of Sapers and Wallach, and we want to thank you all for joining us on today's town hall session. We're so glad to have you as valued clients and friends of the firm and of the bank and of Edelstein as well. We've worked very hard to compile your questions in advance, and hopefully we answer them all today. Now, without further ado, I want to introduce our wonderful team of specialists that we've pulled together for you. To start, we have Mark Rombos, Senior Vice President of Business and Government Banking at Leader Bank, a small business association lender and a bank headquartered in Arlington, Mass. Mark, you want to give a little quick wave there?
Hi, everyone.
We have Scott Kaplowitz, CPA. He's the managing partner of Edelstein and Company, which is a wonderful CPA firm located downtown Boston. And our own Scott Tuxbury, the Vice President of Retirement and Wealth Management of Sapers and Wallach, and one of our retirement plan specialists. So now, the format's going to be, I'm going to ask questions of specific panelists for that you guys submitted in advance, and then they'll have time to answer it. And then we get through all those. We are going to open it up for new questions that have come in. I know a few of them have been submitted this morning and over yesterday afternoon, so we have a bunch to go through. So let me start with Mark. What are the lessons learned from the first round of the SBA PPP funding?
Thank you, Aviva. Thank you for having me, and Leader Bank. We're happy to shed some light on this and give more information. I hope everybody is well and staying safe. Caffeine was a huge thing for us when this all started back on April 3rd, but to be serious, the Treasury created a new tool for monetary stimulus in its playbook. When they created this tool and it works, it can be reused again in the future. For example, unemployment checks, halt on foreclosures, bailing out of banks or big companies. The new tool which is the PPP, looks like it could be and so far seems effective, which just means using banks as distribution agents of checks to small businesses in time of crises. Now, what does that mean for everybody? And this is what we've learned. And it changes how people, I think, will look at their banking relationship in the future and how it's fundamentally changed. We all felt in this round where we have the relationship really means when you have a relationship, that really matters. So as a small business, think about that long and hard. Those with strong relationships, we found, knew the rules, how to apply the documents that were needed and were able to get approved and funded. Those without strong relationships struggle through the process and never land with some big banks. So be organized, have your ducks in a row and paperwork ready. That's the biggest thing that we found was that where businesses did not have a strong relationship with their banks, they were left out in the cold. And I have talked to many businesses over the last month, just pleading, for help. I can't talk to anybody. My emails go unanswered. It was sobering, to take these phone calls, talk to these people, and you could hear it in their voice how appreciative we were just to answer the phone and talk to a human being, talk to a person, provide them with some answers, give them some directions. So that's the biggest piece, I think, what we've learned. Now, as a community bank, we've always strived to be that relationship, to be that point of contact for people. But this really solidified it. And I'm hoping with, some of these relationships that we've built in our building during this time that they'll continue and we'll get stronger and we'll all get through this together.
Thank you. You guys have been terrific. So that's why you're on this panel. We love you, and we think everyone else should love you too. What's the government making available for the second round of the PPP funding?
Right. So the second round opened at 10:30 this past Monday. So there was the second round of financing, which was I think about $340 billion dollars for the PPP. There were talk about changes, maybe directing it to certain segments of businesses. That didn't happen. I think they just wanted to get the money out there. So basically it was really, picking up where round one left. We did improve some processes on the back end here at the bank, which really provided us to get more applications secured with the SBA quicker than we did in round one. So that was good. So we learned from the first process what worked, what didn't work, and then really, had that time between round one and round two to really kind of hone in our processes and, and make it better and quicker.
That's great. So what can a company do to have the best chance of success to secure the funding? I mean, you sort of answered this in the answer to the first question of getting all your ducks in a row, but
Yeah.
maybe you can give a quick highlight.
Yeah, it's really, it's having, finding out what information is needed for certain businesses. 941s, W3s, making sure that application is complete. The biggest thing that we found is, when people are filling out the application, they're missing EIN numbers for the businesses or social security numbers for the ownerships, or not including ownership information of who owns the company. Independent contractors not providing their 1099s. So that's what we found was is really filling out that application completely. Because without it being complete, that really kind of slows the process down. That way we have to reach out, get the information, and it just takes a little bit longer to be able to secure the guarantee. So it's really taking your time, making sure that all the information that's required on an application is filled out and is filled out correctly.
Can you follow up with that on what the process looks like from the applying to the receiving the funds and the timing of all that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Aviva. And I'll speak specifically for Leader Bank. I know some banks are doing it a little bit differently. What we found was important for the customers and the people applying with us was to get the application in and secure that guarantee first. Was getting that SBA guarantee, locking that money in for that client. That's 50% of the battle right there. Once you secure an SBA guarantee, that money is there. It's not going anywhere whether the money runs out or not, that is allocated for that client and for that bank. Okay, so that's key. That's 50% of the battle. So we decided that's what we're going to do. We're going to go in, secure the guarantees as quickly as possible, and then we'll backfill, meaning then we'll go to the next step. So for us, it's securing that guarantee, communicating with the customer that that guarantee has been secured, then going to underwriting / approval, meaning making sure that we have the documents that are required to start the underwriting process. And it's not a lengthy underwriting process, but we still have to underwrite. We have to make sure that, we're meeting the criteria that the SBA has set forth as to what is required for documentation. So from application securing the SBA guarantee to funding, we're striving to do it within 10 to 12 days. That's the process.
Okay.
And, the 10-day is, in round one was a little bit fuzzy with the SBA, but now they're locking it down. They want things funded by day 10. So, and then it's, people who don't have accounts with us is making sure that we're setting up the accounts, getting them onboarded to the bank, making sure they have the products and services that they need to move forward once they get funded. So that's the process in a nutshell. So 10 days, 10 to 12 days.
Got it. And what are the best practices to track the funds in your bank accounts once it comes in, or do you even need to do that?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. Depending on what the SBA sets forth when it comes to forgiveness, once we find that out, people who have accounts with us will be able to track that. So that's why it's kind of important that they have their accounts with us. That way, it kind of minimizes what they'll really need to keep track of. As long as, once we find out what the SBA says, this is what you need to track, and this is, what we'll need to look at after the 8 weeks when it comes to forgiveness. So, but I tell people, listen, if you're writing checks, make sure you're documenting on the check what it's for. Receipts, if you're using it for utility, whatever, just document as much as you can. So that way, at the end, there's no gray area as to whether or not you have that information available to you.
And are there terms of the PPP loan that companies need to be aware of?
The terms. So it's a 24-month loan at 1%. That's the interest rate. Once the forgiveness, once the 8 weeks is over, then there's 6 months where there's no payment of principal and interest. So even though it's a 2-year loan, if there's anything remaining, if it's not forgiven and there's a balance that needs to be paid back, that balance needs to be paid back within 18 months. So it's a 24-month term in total, but for the first 6 months, there's no principal and interest payments. The principal and interest payments start on month 7. So it's 18 months. That's how the payments are spread out. Will be determined as over 18 months.
Well, thank you, Mark. We'll be back to you for more questions, but I'm going to move on to Scott Kaplowitz here. Can you provide, Scott, more detail on the specific costs that are allowed to be forgiven with the PPP loan? For example, payroll, healthcare, rent, utilities, etc.
Sure, I can get pretty specific on that, Aviva. So you're allowed to use 25% of the expenses for other items aside from payroll and payroll-related costs. 75% must be used for payroll and related costs, such as health insurance, retirement plan contributions. The other 25% can be used for rent, utilities, and it's pretty specific, the utilities, although one of the definitions I'm not exactly clear on, but distribution of electricity, gas, water, transportation, telephone, or internet access. So again, it is a broad range of utilities that it can be used for. And also state unemployment taxes or state level taxes as well.
And are those under the 25% or the 75%, the unemployment
Yeah,
taxes?
state would be under the 75%, the state taxes. Okay. The other items would be under the 25%.
Gotcha. And in what ways can companies make sure they're maxing out the forgivable portion of the PPP loan? Yep, he's frozen.
So I think they just need to spend the time to actually map out and make sure that, what employee, obviously because you have the right amount of head count, so that because the way they measure forgiveness is based on the head count as of February 15th, comparing it to the head count on June 30. And also, obviously bringing back and mapping out the expenses to the employees and bringing them back at the right times. So you're actually getting some productivity. So we're actually spending a lot of time on the phone with clients right now, deciding when is the right time to bring back employees so they can maximize forgiveness and get productivity at the same time.
Okay. Are you able to pay any workers or essential employees more to help maximize the forgivable portion of the loan proceeds?
So that's a great question. And there's honestly no answer out there at this point. It's like, I know if you go to the supermarket, they're paying people more. I think there will be some kind of rationale to pay people more during this time period. For battle pay, I would use the term. But again, there is no definition out there right now.
So
it's still up in the air, frankly.
Gotcha. Okay. How should companies best track costs incurred and payments made within the 8-week period where they can be forgiven?
So kind of piggybacking off what Mark said before, we've looked at this a couple different ways. And one way is that we're using a separate bank account for certain clients, and they're keeping it in a separate account, and they may be paying all their expenses out of that account, but then we're putting back in the funds that aren't applicable to the forgiveness piece. Another way we're doing it is we've got clients setting up spreadsheets and doing a detailed analysis on the spreadsheets. And our firm, we actually had a group in our firm of 4 individuals who did a great job, and they developed our own template for debt forgiveness. So we're going to use that as a template, but also the idea of a separate bank account. Some banks have actually wanted the clients to use separate bank accounts, others haven't, but we're doing a detailed accounting and detailed spreadsheets.
Great. What documentation will companies need to provide to substantiate the forgivable portion of the loan? I'm guessing there's some mixed answers here.
Well, I think that's before we got on, I actually asked Mark if they're going to hire, completely selfishly, right, Mark? I asked if you're going to hire an accountants to do the audit of the expenses. And I think you're going to need payroll records. You're going to need, probably canceled checks for rent. You're going to need rent invoices. You're going to need utility bills. You're going to need proof of payment of the utilities. So you're going to need pretty good details. It's almost like we are doing an audit, or the bank is going to be doing an audit of our clients. I imagine we're going to be putting those records together with our clients and getting them over to you, Mark.
Yeah, probably. You're right.
Great. And my last question for you at the moment is, are payments made with the forgivable loan funds deductible on your taxes?
Yeah.
Great question. And I'm going to answer that exactly the same way I answered an earlier question. We don't know yet. We're waiting on that. I actually went to one of my buddies earlier today who's at one of the big 4 firms, and I said, any change on this, anything you guys have seen? And the answer is no. We're still waiting for guidance on that as well. I'm thinking, I go back and forth in my head. It's great because they've said the income is actually, the debt forgiveness is tax-free. They have not come out and said whether the expenses are deductible. But I'm thinking if they're trying to truly make the income tax-free, then they'll probably allow the expenses. But I'm not 100% sure yet. And we also have another factor, which we haven't really talked about yet, is the state level too. So we don't know what they're going to do at the state level with the debt forgiveness, whether that's going to be taxable or tax-free at this point.
Great point. Great point. Now, clearly, we're going to have another one of these town halls as the more comes to light. Switching gears over to the other Scott Tuxbury. We're going to move over a little bit for a few minutes on the Retirement Plan CARES Act question, because I know there are some changes and things that have been fleshed out since our last town hall.
Yeah.
Scott, what is a quick overview of the CARES Act as it relates to companies' retirement plans? In like 20 seconds or less. No.
Okay. I guess the general overview of the CARES Act as it sits today, it afforded individuals that have money saved inside a company-sponsored retirement plan the ability to get access to those dollars penalty-free. So if you're under 59 and a half, normally if you took money out of your retirement account, you'd pay a 10% early withdrawal penalty. That has been waived. In addition to, they also raised the limits of the amount of the loan that an individual can take out of the retirement program. And loans are really categorized 2 ways. One, the traditional loan, where you take a general purpose loan out of a retirement program and you pay yourself back. The limits on those loans have been risen, have doubled. Normally it was 50% of your vested account balance, not to exceed $50,000. Today, the vested portion still applies, but the limit is now $100,000. You can defer any existing loan repayment today on that loan that's already in place if you've been adversely affected by COVID-19 to 1/1/2021. Or if you have started a new loan, you can also defer payments until 1/1/2021. On the other side, individually, for those that have individual retirement accounts, IRAs, the IRS, the Treasury Department also waived the 10% penalty on early withdrawals. You can take out $100,000 penalty-free, and you're allowed to pay yourself back within 3 years. So the unique thing about this portion of the CARES Act is that if you do take $100,000 out or a portion thereof because you're adversely affected by this, and you owe a third of those taxes over the next 3 years. So let's say, for example, I've gone 2 years, I've paid my tax liability on that money that I've taken out during a COVID qualified distribution. And in year 3, I decide to pay it all back. Well, then the IRS will give you a rebate on those 2 previous years' repayments of taxes on those dollars. So that is basically the general overview of how the CARES Act withdrawal program works.
And for those withdrawals, I know this is not one of the pre-asked questions, but as moderator, I get to throw you a curveball. Do you have to be suffering from COVID, from a virus, and to be ill in order to do any of what you just discussed?
Yes, you have to. So there are two things. One, you have to be considered a qualified person. So a qualified person is defined 4 ways. One, if you were tested through a CDC-approved test, and you are an individual that was not only contracted COVID-19, but also SARS, which is also known as COVID-2, then you are a qualified person. The other one is if you have a spouse or dependent that has contracted COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2, then you are considered a qualified household. If you have experienced adverse financial extenuating circumstances due to the coronavirus, again, furloughed, being laid off, then you are considered a qualified person. The fourth one, which is a little bit more ambiguous, is that the Steve Mnuchin, or the Treasury Department, has also said as they see fit, which is a pretty wide definition of someone that is considered qualified. I think for organizations, plan sponsors, please note that this is a self-certification process, meaning that the risk is on the individual. So if someone comes to you and says, hey, I qualify and I would like to enact this type of withdrawal feature, then if they are not adversely affected or not considered qualified by a government regulatory authority, then the risk is on them to prove that they were or otherwise face the consequences. So there's no risk as it sits today with organizations or plan sponsors.
Okay. And Scott, what strategies for success can organizations implement to help manage questions that they get from employees around this?
Well, one, we think being hyper-communicative is one key driver to success. Foreseeing future questions that you think might come up, or if you've got a question yourself personally, I'm sure someone else in your organization does as well. So we've been really proactively reaching out to our clients, letting them be aware that we're a resource to them, as well as on our website, sapersandwallach.com, we have a great COVID-19 information center where we have a multitude of again, attachments, memos, recorded presentations for you to use with your employees, as well as to use as a committee to get better awareness.
And Scott, how will laying off or furloughing a large portion of your employees affect your retirement plan?
So this is something that came out in our minds immediately after helping other clients through similar challenges during 08 and 09. And that is, don't forget about the rule around partial plan terminations. So if 20% of your workforce has been furloughed or laid off, then you could in effect be going through, put your plan, your retirement plan, through a partial plan termination. That is, again, 20% or more. And if there is a partial plan termination declared, then you would have to make all those individuals laid off 100% vested. There is a different varying of opinions. Does it just happen during the 60-day period? Is it for the whole calendar year 2020? Again, your retirement consulting team at SAPERS can help you define that. And that the true key trigger is whether or not you put termination date in the payroll file. So if you're going ahead and uploading payroll periodically and someone you actually furloughed, you put it as a terminated employee, that's how the numbers begin to calculate. So again, if you've got 100 individuals and you've terminated 20 of those, that's 20% or more, then you might have experienced a partial plan termination, and please reach out to us, we can help.
Thank you. So that's the conclusion of our structured Q&A session for the pre-set questions that we had. And now we're going to move towards answering the questions that you submitted just before and during this session. I first want to thank our wonderful panelists for taking the time to help us with all this and to give us the clearest answers they could with a lot of ambiguity. So let me start off. I imagine that you can decide who should answer this, but can you pay bonuses and have them, this is probably for Scott Kaplowitz, can you pay bonuses and have them be considered forgiven? For example, performance bonuses. Is there any limit to who's able to get a performance bonus, or can you choose to do reviews for all employees during the 8 weeks and pay performance bonuses during that time? Can you pay a bonus to people who've been willing to come and provide services during closures or for other exemplary services? I understand that no bonus can place an employee over the 100,000 and up amount.
That's a great question, Aviva. And I'm not so sure I actually have an answer to that. I kind of touched about it a little bit before in the sense that can you pay people battle pay? But we're not 100% sure whether you can actually pay people bonuses. We haven't gotten clarification on that. I'm hoping that we do soon because I am getting that question a lot. But I am, again, I think you got to look at the normal payroll over probably that 852nd period and say, well, what's their normal payroll? Again, you may be able to prorate some bonuses in here, but again, we don't have guidance on this, so we're not 100% sure.
Okay, and for a firm that's self-insured for health insurance,
Yeah.
what is forgiven? Is it the actual healthcare claims that we pay during the 8 weeks? Or can we use the monthly premium that our actuaries have calculated and which forms the basis of our employee contributions as well as the cost imputed to our K1 partners as income?
Yeah, so I'm thinking that you're probably going to use the cost that's imputed versus the actual payouts. But again, there is no guidance on that either at this point. I'm not actually sure that's something they're even going to get to with guidance. Frankly, I'm not sure that's something they're even going to think of. So again, to the person who asked the question, you're probably going to want to work very closely with your accountant to justify what you think is the right approach in that situation.
Okay, and is the percent reduction in full-time employees as applied as a penalty against the loan forgiveness amount? In other words, is it a reduction in actual expense paid over the 8 weeks? And if the FTE reduction was due to retirement, employees changing jobs and other attrition factors, is this a consideration?
So the answer is that we don't know yet on the attrition. We don't know if there's excused, if there's ways we're going to be able to get around reducing the FTEs for acceptable reasons like that. We are hoping, and I've been on a lot of calls with different firms, our firm, et cetera. This is a topic we've discussed a lot as well. But the answer is that if people do leave, you are reduced. So if you have 4 employees, the maximum reimbursement would be 75% because it's 3 out of 4. I probably shouldn't use 3 out of 4, but 3 out of 4 is 75%, and that's the maximum you can get reimbursed, and you still have to use 75% of the 75% for payroll and payroll-related costs, and the rest can be used for the rent, utilities, etc.
How will the $100,000 cap be calculated for the forgiven portion of payroll costs? Would it simply be an annualization of the 2 months payroll cost paid? This will not be a true representation of actual average monthly salaries paid in this particular person's organization over a 12-month period of time. And does this factor in the calculation in any way?
So again, I believe that the way I'm reading this and the way that we're seeing this right now and the way it's defined as of today, as everyone on this phone call knows, things change daily with this. But my understanding, it is actually 8/52 of the person's pay is going to be includable against the forgiven piece.
Okay, and another question that came in was, what is meant by the transportation under the utilities forgiveness? Is it fuel used in a business?
I have yet to find that definition myself. I've been looking. I think could be fuel, but again, I have not seen the definition of that yet. Mark, have you?
No, I haven't. The question also came up whether lease vehicles under the company, if it's under the company, the portion of that, the monthly lease payments being part of that. So we have our SBA administrator trying to get some answers around that also.
Mm-hmm.
There is a question under utilities, is something like the dumpster expense count? I think we don't know.
We don't know. I don't think a dumpster is a utility per se, but again, we don't. I mean, again, from what I've read and the definitions I've read, I haven't seen dumpster expense mentioned.
Would software be considered under rent? I know you mentioned internet, but
I don't believe that.
Let me rephrase it. Software lease.
Again, I don't believe that would apply from the definition of rent.
And from a triple net lease, would property taxes, insurance, etc., be deductible for the forgiveness?
I'm sorry, Aviva, I couldn't hear you.
All right, try again. For a triple net lease, would property taxes, insurance, et cetera, be deductible for the forgiveness?
Again, I have not seen a full definition on that, but the way I read it is that it's just going to be the rent itself. That's my understanding.
Okay. If someone paid an annual bonus in Q1, would they need to be at 75% for the loan forgiveness based on normal wages, or do we need to include the bonus?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Am I not? Can you guys, the other folks hear me, or is Scott's in? All right, let me try again. If someone paid an annual bonus in Q1, would they need to be at 75% for the loan forgiveness based on normal wages, or do they need to include the bonus?
I don't think that's applicable. Again, it's the 75% would be during that 8-week measurement period. You would need to, it would only be the amount incurred and paid during that 8-week period. The Q1 would not apply to the forgiveness piece.
And okay, thank you. And how about tool rentals? This company rents tools on an ongoing basis, and they replace broken tools.
Again, I don't think that would apply. Based on the definition that we're seeing today, I don't believe that would apply.
Okay. Another client wrote in, we were lucky to receive the first CARES Act PPP forgivable loan, hooray, and we want to know, other than payroll, what are the other expenses that we can pay as part of the forgivable loan? For instance, our retirement payments, which we answered yes.
Mm-hmm.
We believe we can use the loan to pay our retirement. Our 2019 retirement that we must pay by August 2020 is roughly $230,000, which we pay from January to August. To date, and before the pandemic, we had paid 80. Can we pay the remainder of the payments owed, which amounts to $133,000 out of this loan, or should we calculate the usual 25 to 30K we pay per month and would have paid it but didn't since the beginning of March?
So I believe that it would probably be again, it's not clearly defined again, but our supposition is that it's probably the 25% match or so, plus there may be some opportunity to pre-fund some retirement in your year end. But again, we just don't know because again, there's no definition out there.
Okay. Someone said, we understand we can pay our rent, which we plan on using the loan to pay April and May. Can we use the loan to pay the next few months?
Again, there's not a clear definition, but our belief is that you're going to be able to definitely pay 2 months during that 8-week period and potentially pay back rent, potentially. Again, that has not been fully defined. Mark, have you seen anything different on that?
No, I haven't. I think that's exactly right. From what I've read too, it's from when funding begins, once you receive the funds going forward. Now, again, back rent, I'm not sure about it. I think that's a little unclear, as you said, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, because we actually had that discussion this morning. I was on a roundtable of exciting roundtable of CPA managing partners this morning, and we were talking about that, and and that did come up. And again, we had another partner internal call this morning as well, and there is nothing out there. But again, our feeling is that you should definitely be able to pay that 8-week period. The question is, can you pay back rent? And we just don't know. We don't believe that you're going to be able to prepay your rent, obviously, for the rest of this year to fit into that 25%. I mean, obviously, we want to be as creative as possible, but within the guidelines.
Yeah. And this you may have already answered in some fashion, but someone said, is my understanding that the payroll, it is my understanding, the payroll for the 8 weeks that we'll be requesting will be forgiven compared to the actual payroll for the first 2 months of 2020. Will they be looking for actual dates from January 1, 20 to February 29, 20, or for pay dates and check dates that fall in that period? For example, our first pay date in January was January 10th, 2020, and it's included work days from 12/2019. Do we have an option of which to use? And related to that, if we were funded on April 20th and our first pay date is May 1st, do we use the full payroll from that date, which includes the period April 11th, 20 to April 24th, or do we use the payroll from 4/20 out 8 weeks further?
That's again subject to interpretation on the payroll forgiveness. There's different measurement periods of the 8 weeks for payroll, and whether you can use the pay period beginning when you actually have your first payroll, or the payroll that occurred from April 1st to such and such date. So again, that is subject to interpretation, and the AICPA came out with a pretty confusing letter this morning. So I think that's very much still subject to interpretation as well. So that's one of those gray areas.
Okay. Is 50% of unemployment payment for reimbursable employees being paid by the government until December 31st, 2020?
Off the top of my head, I'm not 100% sure on that. I believe it might be, but we can circle back on that.
Okay, and that's a good point. If for some reason we didn't get to every question, we will make sure we get some answers for everyone. Can the PPP funds be used for vacation payouts? Can they be used for bonuses? Is 50% of unemployment payment for reimbursable employees being paid by the government until December, the same question, until 2020? Is there a definite rule regarding audits for PPP recipients? And this person had heard something about a $2 million threshold.
Yeah, so the $2 million threshold has been thrown out there because Senator Mnuchin threw it out, that people receiving over $2 million will be audited. Then there's also been thrown out in some of the media that people getting less than $2 million will be audited as well. But clearly everyone who received over $2 million, it appears like they will be audited.
Okay. What period of payments are covered? For example, when does the program start upon funding with a particular payroll? When does the time period? We already said that we don't know yet. It's not sure. Since the intent of the PPP is to continue providing employment, should or can we pay folks to stay home during the 8-week PPP loan period? What portion of the loan be forgiven? Or will that portion, if you tell people to stay home?
So the answer is, and actually I have a couple of clients we've actually been talking about that. I do have a client of mine who owns a restaurant, and they had to close down for a couple of weeks, and they are paying their employees to stay home. So the answer is that yes, you can pay them to stay home. We are recommending, obviously, if they can, to bring the people back. I haven't seen anything that says they can't pay them to stay home. In this situation, the employees are made whole because they're going to be home for 2 weeks. Very difficult to collect unemployment, because I actually helped a couple of clients for the first time in my life. Never thought I'd be doing unemployment applications, but I did help a couple of clients do unemployment applications. And I think the answer is that these people are going to be paid during that 2-week period. So you actually can pay people to be home.
Okay. Someone read recently the following: before submitting a PPP application, all borrowers should carefully review the required certification that current economic uncertainty makes this loan request necessary to support the ongoing operations of the applicant. Borrowers must make this certification in good faith, taking into account their current business activity and their ability to access other sources of liquidity sufficient to support their ongoing operation in a manner that is not significantly detrimental to the business. Are there more specific criteria than that?
So I guess I'll touch on that a little bit, but so one of the topics we actually brought up is that exact topic this morning with the managing partners in our group. And as you know, this is the PPP has been the full employment for banking, and it's been the full employment for accounting over the last month. So when clients call me looking for their tax returns, the reason we haven't got your tax return done yet is because we only know 3 letters at this point, PPP. The answer is that the question is very simple, is that we don't know if you're hurt yet. And it's really hard to determine when you're going to be hurt. I think that it is a broad definition, and we haven't seen it finely defined, because honestly, we don't know if a company is hurt now or they're going to be hurt in the fall. So I think it is a broad definition. I had this call with a client yesterday, and he said to me specifically that he felt very guilty. He said, but he can see a downturn starting in August because he's got a bunch of contracts, people are living up to the contracts, but they're not going to renew them. So I do believe that you have to look forward and see when you're going to be hurt. In our roundtable this morning, one of the guys in the accounting firms said that he doesn't view his firm as going to be hurt, but what he's doing is he's segregating the money into a separate bank account, and if he's not hurt, he is going to return the funds.
So similar question that I guess someone else who got it certified that there was economic uncertainty, which was totally true. So what if they experience economic issues later in the year that they didn't anticipate, or do they have to return the money? Is it mandatory? They can pay interest on it, right?
Yeah. So I mean, I think once you document the forgiveness, it really becomes not a loan at that point. So as long as you're able to document the forgiveness, there is no interest component at that point, and then you can make a decision of whether you want to return the funds to the government later in the year. So if someone gets $1 million and they have 800,000 forgiven, the 200,000 becomes a loan, and they can obviously repay it the next day. That other 800,000 could sit in a bank account, and they could decide whether they do want to return it to the government.
Okay. And someone else asked, is June 30th a magical date that a company has to have a certain number of employees on payroll to get the loan converted to a grant?
Yeah, well, so it's a two-pronged test. So the June 30 date is you bring back your employees. So I'll give you a great example. I had a conversation with a client today, and he has 5 employees. He laid 3 off. He's got 2 today. So he's going to get to June 29th hypothetically and hire them back. The issue is he's not going to spend the money within the 8-week period. So he's not going to get for full forgiveness. He'll get some forgiveness. So you have to look at this, and each situation is different. And like I said, internally, we developed a template that we can play around with the models and say, you know, what's your best business decision? Because I still think it's a business decision on when you want to bring people back. I had a call yesterday with somebody, and he has 10 employees. He didn't want to bring 2 of them back anyway. So he's going to get 80% forgiveness, and he wasn't going to use 100% of the loan proceeds anyway. So it made sense for him not to bring back those 2 people, even though they were being subsidized over that 8-week period.
Interesting. Okay. Can you use the PPP dollars for new hires that weren't on the payroll February 15th?
You can. Yep, that's come up a lot, and it doesn't have to be the same person. So if we had 3 employees and it was Aviva, Mark, and myself, and I decided I wanted to get rid of Mark and I wanted to terminate Mark, I could then hire back Scott Tuxbury, right? So then he would get me back to that 3-person count. I have a client of mine, they actually lost somebody during this period who left. So now they're down from 4 employees to 3, and he is going to rehire probably around June 1st when hopefully the economy reopens.
And what happens after that? So let's say you hired someone, but let's say you decided either it didn't work out because they were a bad hire, or in fact, you didn't really need them for the long haul.
Again, I think, and I don't know, because I haven't seen that you have to retain somebody for a period thereafter. But our thinking and our feeling is that there might be some retention for a period afterwards. But again, we just don't know.
Okay. Has there been guidance on employees who resigned during this time to count against our head count where we wouldn't have the option to bring them back?
Again, we don't know. Hopefully they're going to have some guidance on that. We're thinking there may be, but again, we just don't know yet.
Okay. Is the EMAC and EMAC supplement a covered cost? I don't know what EMAC stands for, so I apologize.
I'm not 100% sure, to be honest with you.
Okay. Then the next question I have is, if you got PPP funds in the middle of a pay period, can you attribute that entire pay period to the PPP or for the days following the date the funds were received?
Yeah, again, I think that's subject to interpretation. I do think you're going to be able to get 8 weeks of payroll in, whether it's, you know, the period that incurred before and you pay it during that date, or it's going to be that you get some more at the end. So I've already started to have conversations with clients about, we may, again, once we get full guidance on this, we may want to do a special payroll, for example, so that we make sure we get a full 8 weeks worth of payroll into the PPP forgiveness.
Okay, and where or when might guidance come from regarding the question of whether or not PPP funds can be used for bonuses or battle pay, as you called it?
Yeah, I think we're going to get it from the Treasury, and I'm hoping we're going to get some guidance next week. I saw the magical date of May 5th a couple times, but again, it's the Q&A is coming out all the time. So we are looking at the Treasury website and looking at the Q&As and the facts, and that's how we're learning a lot. We are reading articles. I will say there's a lot of false information out there, and there's a lot of speculation. And you read some articles, like I read one article, you asked a question earlier, Aviva, about whether it's taxable income. Well, I read an article that said that, you know, the expenses were non-deductible. Then I've read other articles that say that that they are deductible. So again, there's no guidance, and there's a lot of misinformation out there.
Okay, and if the employee is a teacher working 10 months, is it 8 weeks of 42 weeks, even if the teachers are paid for 52?
I would say it's probably 8 of the 52.
Okay.
Because again, they're being compensated over 52 weeks, so I would believe it would be 8 of the 52.
Aviva, I know what EMAC stands for, Emergency Medical Assistance for U.S. territories. So that's where the EMAC question was, is the PPP allowed for, again, emergency medical management assistance between United States and or its territories?
If you want to send that question over to us, Aviva, I'll get it answered.
Yeah, I will. I think that one is is unique.
Yeah.
How do you use funds for hourly and tipped employees? Is it just an overall average amount to everyone?
So hourly and average and tips. So tipped employees, the actual tip wages actually count against the forgiveness. I guess I may need a little more clarity on what's meant by that. But I do know you can count tip wages towards your forgiveness. So I mentioned the restaurant client earlier. Their tip wages are counted against the forgiveness during the 8-week period.
Okay. And then is there clarification on what funds HHS can be allocated for? Home health services? What is HHS?
I think that's a new grant. That's not. It's actually not something that. Again, if you want to send that question over to us,
Yeah.
we have a division within Edelstein who specializes in medical practices. So they're doing a lot of work with that. So again, send that question over. I'll get you an answer on that.
You got it. How about a payroll for a pay period covering time before the loan was approved? Loan was approved on 4/9 and we processed 4/24. The payroll covering is another timing question. I mean, there's a bunch of people who don't know what.
Yeah, again, I do believe you're going to get that 8-week period in. And again, I did ask, and I think you may have asked this as well. I think you go about your normal business. And if you're going to give people pay raises during that period, and it's during the period that you would normally give raises, then you would go about the normal business. And I believe that would qualify for the reimbursement of the PPP funds.
Okay. So we've addressed that. It came up again, but can we hire temporary workers to help maximize the forgivable portion of the loan while we have the opportunity to have it forgiven?
Again, it depends on the temp workers. If they're employees of the company, and it depends on the term, we don't have a full definition, but you can't go out and hire a temp agency per se, because that would not count towards the forgiveness. That's clear in the rules. But in this situation, if you're hiring employees, again, you have to look at the definition of temporary. I don't think there's complete guidance out there. Does temporary mean that you hired them on April 1st and you're letting go of them June 30th? Again, we don't know.
But you're differentiating between contract workers and employees.
Yeah. Yep. So there's a lot of we hired, we're a CPA firm, so we'll hire part-time people to come in and work through an agency. Our payments to that agency do not count. Under the original legislation, when we first read it, subcontractors and temp help may have qualified. as time went on, it got clarified that you could only have W-2 employees.
Got it. Got it. Question here, can a Q1 unemployment payment made after the PPP loan funding date be part of the forgivable payroll?
I believe, again, it's the way it's written is it has to be incurred and paid during that 8-week period. But again, I would want, before answering that 100%, I would want further guidance on that.
Okay, and what will be the process for banks to review files for forgiveness and the timing? Maybe Mark can answer that, or I don't, either one of you.
Again, we'll be able to track transactions if the account is with us. What exactly to track, again, is still up in the air, as Scott has said, when it comes to forgiveness.
Okay. And one of the things we talked about earlier was that maybe Mark's bank comes out and hires Edelstein and Company to do the audit of the PPP funds.
Right.
You like that plug, Mike? Right, Mark?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's perfect. Yeah. As soon as we, like Scott said, as soon as we get more guidance of exactly what they're looking for, then we can kind of, build the roadmap for what we'll need, to do that.
So maybe more clarification, Scott. When does the 8-week period begin and end? Is there a specific date, or is it just 8 weeks of?
No, so it's the date of origination. So you really look at the origination date. So if you were the loan was originated on April 20th, you're 8 weeks, and correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I'm close enough, right? It's going to be June 20th. Okay. So again, it's an 8-week period. And I don't know if Mark has heard this. I've also seen and heard some rumors that they may be looking at extending that 8-week period. I don't want to make any promises, but I've heard that from a couple different people.
Yeah, Scott, I haven't heard that. And I've heard, when you say origination, are you saying when the loan is funded? Because we're looking at it when loan gets funded. That's when it starts.
Yeah, and I would agree with that as well.
Okay. All right, good.
A lot of gray matter in this stuff here.
Absolutely crazy.
And Aviva, it's been a lot of fun because it's changed every single day.
Yeah.
So like I had a client come back to me the other day and say, why didn't you tell me to do this 3 weeks ago? And I said, well, to be honest with you, we got legislation last night, or we got something from the Treasury that says you can do this. And so and actually I'll tell you what it was. So that the 6.2% match of FICA can be deferred. You can basically, before you couldn't borrow, you couldn't stop funding the FICA as an employer at the 6.2% match. Then they came out and said, and you couldn't do the PPP, so it was one or the other. Now you can actually not match the 6.2% through the date of forgiveness, and that's an interest-free loan from the government, and you can then pay it back on December 31st, 2021 and December 31st, 2022. And again, at first they said you couldn't do both, and then they came out and said you could.
I mean, just to give you an idea too, in the first round of financing, we were waiting till, I think it was close to midnight before we actually had the PPP application. Now we're going live, the next morning, or, midnight of the next day. And we still didn't have a PPP application from the SBA.
So we actually did them. We were on the opposite spectrum. So we actually did the first application that came out for a lot of our clients, Mark. Yep. And then at midnight that night, we were redoing all of our clients' applications because it was the wrong form.
Right. Yeah.
So question, would it be possible to share a spreadsheet template to track the PPP qualified payments with the people on the call?
I have to check internally. It is proprietary, so I don't know that I can.
Okay. So Edelstein clients can get it?
Yeah.
Okay. And then two quick related questions to the timing. So if you have to have this, do you have to have the same number of employees at the end of the 8-week period on that day as stated in the loan application? And does the total amount of the loan have to be used by the end of the 8-week period?
I mean, to get full forgiveness, yes. I mean, the answer basically is yes to both. And again, that might be a wrong answer, because we don't know. So if Aviva gets sick and she decides she doesn't want to work for Edelstein anymore, that answer might not be right because there may be an exception to the rule. But again, as far as we know today, if you have 8 employees at the beginning, you're supposed to have 8 at the end to get forgiveness.
And the application actually asks that question too.
Okay. Let me just check. I think we might have come to the end of our questions, with the exception of the EMAC question, which I think we're going to take after this this session is over. Last chance if anyone wants to throw one more at us. No, I almost come up with the answer. Maybe. It depends. It's gray area, but don't want to belittle it. I mean, I have to commend all of the folks in this panel. There's a lot of moving parts and it keeps changing, which is why we create another town hall when there's just enough new information that has to be disseminated among folks. So appreciate you guys staying with us and staying on, because we're giving it to you as quickly as we get it from the experts that we know of. So I think we're going to conclude right now the session, and I would say I want to thank again our wonderful panelists joining us. Mark, if someone wanted to get in touch with you or Leader Bank, how should they contact you?
The best way to get in touch with me is through my email address, which is mromvos, R-O-M-V-O-S, @leaderbank.com.
And Scott Kaplowitz, if someone wanted to get in touch with you or Edelstein, how would you want to contact?
Well, the easiest way right now, since we're not in the office, is my email address is sbk@edelsteincpa.com.
Super. And Scott, if someone wanted to get in touch with you, how would they get in touch with you?
Of course, you can reach out to me by email as well. My first name S, last name Tuxbury @sapers-wallach.com.
All right, so I just want to thank everybody who joined us today. These are some very interesting times. You know, we always just say maybe we should live in interesting times, or maybe live in interesting times. We certainly got it to a fare thee well here. But we just want to thank you and let you know that our Sapers and Wallach Hill Group of New England team, along with our wonderful network of specialists, we've got a great accounting firm, great bank here on the phone, are here to help guide you through any obstacle that might come your way. More stuff is going to come our way before we're done, and always feel free to reach out to us. We'll do our best to get answers, and if we think it applies to a lot of our clients, we'll do another town hall. So we thank you for anything that the great questions that were asked, and please don't hesitate to call. We look forward to catching up with you all soon. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.